This podcast is for information purposes only and is not and should not be construed as professional advice or an offer or commitment by any Rabobank group member to enter into a transaction. The views expressed by the presenter and or guests are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Rabobank. Please see the podcast description for our full disclaimer. Welcome to RaboTalk's Growing Our Future, where we talk to experts from both here in New Zealand and across the world to bring New Zealand farmers and growers the information they need to make informed strategic decisions about the future direction of their business to ensure they continue to thrive in a fast-changing world.
New Zealand farming businesses are operating in an environment of constant change, shifting market expectations, increasing scrutiny around environmental performance, emerging technologies, evolving regulation, climate volatility, and the ongoing challenge of making confident long-term decisions in the face of uncertainty. For many farmers, the question isn't just what the future may look like, but how to build the decision-making structures, discipline, and capability to navigate the future well. I'm your host, Blake Holgate. Today we're diving into what good governance really means for farming businesses. We'll explore how governance principles used around boardroom tables can be applied practically at the farm level. We'll also look at the major trends and developments farmers need to be aware of now and the capabilities needed to help farming businesses remain competitive and resilient over the long term. And helping us unpack this is someone who brings a deep experience across farming, governance, and agribusiness leadership. Today I'm joined by Rob Hewett, a sixth-generation farmer and experienced governance leader who recently was appointed chair of AgriZeroNZ Zealand. Rob farms sheep, beef, wind and forestry in South Otago and has held a range of senior governance roles, including chair of Silver Fern Farms, Farmlands, Woolworks, Pioneer Energy, Fern Energy and Rewiring Aotearoa, just to name a few. He was also recognised as Deloitte's Top 200 Chair of the Year in 2023. Rob brings a practical perspective on how farming businesses can strengthen decision-making, manage risk, and prepare for change shaping the future of agriculture. Rob, welcome to Growing Our Future podcast.
Hey Blake, how are you? Good to see you.
No, looking forward to this conversation. Now, I know you, but probably many of our listeners do as well, but for those that don't, can you start by telling us a little bit about your farming background, your governance journey, and what drew you into leadership and board roles?
Yeah, it's an interesting, I find it an interesting journey. I was never going to be a farmer. I was one of those kids of the 80s whose parents told them you'd be bloody stupid to go and do farming and have a 23% interest rate knocking your current account every month. And so I, true to that, I buggered off and I worked for an oil company for a dozen or so years. And then on a high-speed train back from Kuala Lumpur to the airport one day in about 2001, I had a bit of an epiphany, which was if I want my kids to grow up with any semblance of real values and normalcy, being on an expat treadmill probably wasn't going to be it. So my wife and I, both from farming backgrounds, we were having a bit of a where do we go from here? And funnily enough, the old man rang up. He farmed at that stage in West Otago, and he said, the Sunday night wrapper up. And he said, the next door neighbour's place to sell. I could buy it. No reason to. You're not coming back. Your brother's off playing professional rugby. And we left it sit. So for 3 days I stewed. And then I said, well, if you're serious about that and you feel like you want an apprentice, then we might be up for it. So it all sort of came together. It was a bit of serendipity, really. But, a growing realisation that the value set and if you're in farming for the lifestyle reasons only, it's a quick way to go broke. But, the value set, the aspirations, the integral, it's almost visceral link with the land, really. Just the underlying enduring values is key. And that was something that really resonated. So that's how we got back here. We didn't actually buy that farm in the end. We came second to that auction and we kept looking. And in the end, we found our place in Mount Stewart, which is in the Manuka Gorge, which is between Lawrence and Milton in the Clutha district in South Otago. Came home. We bought 475 hectares back in 2002 and moved back here. And then The neighbour's place came up 6 months later, and it was like, shit. Okay, but, that's the expansion plan, and we mightn't be ready for it, but the opportunities only come along once in a generation. And we doubled our size of the farm and went to just under 1,000 hectares. That allowed me to employ staff on a permanent full-time basis, and that allowed me to go and do springboard into off-farm activity. So roll forward 25 years. We've been here just about 25 years. We've now added 2 more farms to that mix, so we're running about 1,600 hectares, 16,000 stock units here in the Manuka Gorge. So I'm playing on the board of Monopoly, if you like, moving down Park Lane. That sounds very wanky, but at the end of the day, we've just been very fortunate in the way that we've bolted farms that are next to each other together. And the last farm that we purchased in April doubled the size of the property again, virtually. And talking about once in a generation opportunity, that farm had been in the same family for over 150 years. So whatever that is, it's not once in a generation, it's once in an epoch. But yeah, we're here. We run a breeding finishing system, sheep and beef. We have quite a lot of forestry as well. I have a very simple philosophy with regard to, well, I think it's simple. 5 hectare paddocks, one gate from the yards, so lots of lanes, lots of efficiency. And if it's too steep to get a tractor over it, you put it into trees. So it's effectively a variation on right tree in the right place. I also have a view that when you're out in the shit, like it has been for the week, it's nice here today, but the last 3 or 4 days have been pretty average, and it's got to be as pleasant a place to work as possible. So I like trees. I also like chainsaws. So we make it all integrate and work, and it's optimising land use, succession planning, diversification of income, ultimately, whether that's carbon farming or forestry timber, we'll see. And the wind turbines at the top of the hill are just another variation on that. So, yeah, that's us. Yeah, really enjoy it. Getting into governance, how to wrap that question up. How did I do that? My journey started, so the corporate gig at Shell helped. I was running a business unit, a supply chain business unit across Asia Pacific, sort of 13 markets, getting packets of smokes and Mars bars and bottles of Coke to all of our consumers. It was about a 9 billion revenue business. It was quite large back in 2002. And being inside Shell, which was the company I was working for, I saw a lot of things. And even today, 25 years later, the training and development that they put into us at that stage still is relevant today, good disciplines. And that allowed me to have, I hadn't only spent my time on farm, and I don't mean that dismissively. I just have seen a few other things and bring that influence and thought process to bear as well. So in 2007, I was contacted by Robbie Burnside, who was almost a neighbour of mine, just about a neighbour of your parents too, Blake, over the back, and near on the way to Clydevale. And he was a director of PBCS at that stage, now Silver Fern Farms. And he said to me, look, I've been keeping an eye on you, mate. You turn up at all of our meetings and you ask questions, which is good, and you're fully shared. That's good too. Have you ever thought about being a director of PBCS? Well, funny you say that. That is very attractive, but you've got a terrible succession plan. Ringing up, I'm going to retire next year. How about you think about it? You got 2 months. Then I'll talk about that later on, because that sort of development and nurturing a talent is really important. So I'll come back to that. But anyway, that's where it all started. So yes, I had aspirations of getting into governance. It's always been interesting, the big geopolitic, bigger picture stuff outside the farm gate, being linked directly to consumer has always been of very big interest to me, and that's followed me through. All of the governance opportunities that I've got now, we bring that focus to it. So it's almost an evolution, really.
Look, yeah, I do know the area of farm reasonably well, Rob. I don't know if it's probably ever been described as Park Lane, but nonetheless, it is a nice part of the country. Yeah, it's amazing how when you put your mind to something and focus on something, often the stars align. And it sounds like that happened to you once you sort of had that epiphany on the train and decided that's where you're going. You sort of things fell into place because that's where the focus went and where you wanted to end up.
Yeah, it's a bit of that, Blake. That's true. Opportunities. The thing about opportunities is, and this is repeated all my life actually, is that opportunities usually, invariably, in fact, never happen when you want them. Yeah, and if you sit back thinking, so my observation to Robbie when he rang me in November 2007 was, oh, yes, I do like governance and, well, like the idea of it, but, I've got a farm here to go and wrangle into shape, and I've got young kids that need a lot of, Saturday morning, blah, blah, lots of busy. When I'm 50, that'd be great. That's what I'm sort of thinking. And he said, well, the opportunities will only come along when they come along, and it's how you deal with it. And that is so true. So I think, that's what I'm saying is, it's important to have flexibility and the ability to try and see how you can fit things in. I am not saying you should be a scattergun and to go, oh shit, this week it's this, next week it's that. It's not. There is a grand plan direction that you're going in, but how you get from A to B might be by C or D, but you're getting there ultimately. And having the flexibility, I've seen people that have opportunities presented to them on a plate, and they can't see the opportunity. They just see the difficulty. And then they wonder why they're not getting where they want to be. Change is hard, but you got to be up for it. And that's possibly the differentiator for me, is that I've been able to absorb and see the opportunity and adapt accordingly. So it's worked so far.
Yeah, often the perfect time is when the opportunity is there, even if it's inconvenient. And let's turn to some of those skills around governance, and you've alluded to many of them, but when you think about good governance, how do you define in plain language, especially for a farming business, which I assume is in many, many ways quite different from, the Shell with the 9 billion turnover, the business unit you're working in, and many of the other companies that you've chaired in New Zealand?
Yeah, farming businesses... My view on farming director governors is that they are an incredibly pragmatic, sensible bunch. Fundamentally, and we manage risk inherently in our business every day. Every day. In fact, usually farmers don't think about it as a risk. Weather's just weather, or markets are just markets. So what do I do to mitigate that? Well, you talk about it and you go, well. So, in fact, we don't even use words like that. It's like, well, what are you doing to deal with the El Nino that's coming next year? Well, I might be thinking about early indicators, or I might be thinking about winter crops, or I might be looking at offloading. These are all risk management strategies, So it's not a million miles away from what you're doing in a company. I mean, yes, we might be talking about taking forward cover on currency or booking contracts or things like that, but fundamentally, it's the same thing. So. And the reality around farmer balance sheets now, and you'll know it in the bank, they're not insignificant businesses these days. Even an entry-level farm, you're looking at, by the time you wrap everything up, you're $6 to $8 million worth of hoot, and a fair chunk of that's going to be provided by the banks. So you're on the treadmill, and you've got to make it work. So those risk mitigation strategies, partnerships, being market-led, are increasingly part of it. My observation would be of the sector generally is, and it seems to be an age and stage thing, the transition out of or between generations, often what is found is that farms, by virtue of the land value escalation over the last 25 years, or probably forever actually, farmers have usually, long-standing farms who've been around for a while have usually got a pretty conservative balance sheet. They're not geared and don't need to be. So that's all cool. You don't need to farm to maximise the opportunity because you're in a comfortable existence. Of course, when you go to sell, you want to maximise the opportunity of your. This is your crystallisation event. You've got to have the land price, the asset price has got to be maximised because. Geez, I've got to pay the rest home for the next 20 years and I'm going to be alive for that long. So, that's going to cost a lot of money. So the expectation gets set on what is that land used for? Is it forestry? And around me, yes, forestry is still real. Is it horticulture? Not around me, but in other parts of the country, it certainly is. Do I have water? Is it dairyable? What's the land value going to be worth? So somebody coming in to that environment is paying top dollar. Now, the difference between an income that means you can run it conservatively because my balance sheet isn't geared, to one that it is geared, and I've got to work my ass off here. That delta, if you like, forces behavioural change, and that is happening increasingly now. There's a tidal shift that's happening now as the ownership changes, and I think that is going to force more structured thinking into the way that businesses are run, which comes back to the governance question. So, farmers around my co-op boards, there's been a bit of press recently. I saw co-op, somebody came out and said that co-op, part of the reason that co-ops have failed in the meat sector is that the governors are shithouse. That's just not true. There's plenty of failures in the private sector, and I can speak to a few of those too, where you've got to go and unwind some trouble. So I don't think that's a fair or reasonable comment. My experience of farmer directors is they're very good, they're pragmatic, they're good to get on with, and that's part of the issue too. You've got to have a good time around the board table. And I don't mean party, I just mean you've got to get on with the people that you're working with, because when the shit hits the fan, and invariably it does, you've got to trust the people that you're working with, and you've got to be able to see things not necessarily in a similar sort of way, but trust that their view is valid and is worth listening to. And ag people are pragmatic. Yeah, I like working with them. So I don't think your question about governance at a farm level and governance at the big company level, really, at the end of the day, a bit of education around what the options around risk mitigation might be. Yes, that's fair. But the reality is, all we're talking about is probably a decimal place on the balance sheet. In the big companies, it's a couple of places over to the right. But fundamentally, the same program.
Yeah, so many of the principles are much the same and apply regardless of the scale of the business.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned around the board table and getting a range of good views. How important is independent thinking? And at a farm level, I'm probably thinking advisors, accountants, bankers, consultants, advisory boards, improving the quality of a farming business. What emphasis do you or would you put on independent advice?
Yeah, a lot. The question is, how do you form that up? That in my mind. So yes, advisors, absolutely. I've got a forestry consultant. I've got a geneticist that helps me with my breeding program. I talk to the bank regularly about opportunities and go and source information on that. But then I guess in my own situation, because of my fortunate position of being able to see quite a lot down the value chain with the governance roles that I've got, I can see a lot of the stuff that's coming, and I can implement that on my farm. So if I didn't have that visibility, I'd probably need a farm advisor or an advisor of some sort to help me with that. And I don't need that because I've got it. But that's by my situation as opposed to normal sort of run of the mill. So I would, what would I do if I didn't do my governance? I would be very close to my revenue setters. So if you're a dairy farmer, get close to your dairy company. If you're a meat farmer, get close to your freezing, your exporter processor, and understand what the motivators. So how do I extract value out of the market through them? And what does that mean for my on-farm behaviour? So bring it back inside the farm gate. So, for instance, FAT Plus Gold or FAT Plus accreditation is an absolute no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, because the customer wants it. We talk about, emissions is a bit of a hot topic amongst farmers, particularly sheep farmers, because they think, well, the last 30 years we've made so many increases in efficiency, which is all true, that we don't need to do too much in the space. Yeah, well, it's a start, but it ain't enough. And the reason I say that is because if people listen to what supermarket chains like Tesco's or Whole Foods in the US or Sainsbury's or Lidl in Germany are saying, they will understand that there is a huge desire amongst those discerning consumers to have an emissions profile that is reducing. And we've got a role to play in that. Now, we can ignore that and say, well, we've done enough, Well, the reality is the consumer doesn't care. And when they're wandering down the aisle, looking at the products that they want to buy, at some stage that will have resonance with them. So are we doing something or not that meets their value set, will give them a reason or not to buy the product on offer? And I want them to buy my stuff. Doesn't need to be every week. If they're going to have a good steak, if they want steak once a fortnight, make sure it's mine because I produce for them on farm the type of product they want to buy, whether that's emissions or water quality or animal welfare. And usually what I've found is that it's not about the processes on the farm changing necessarily. Maybe there's a little bit of that, but usually what it's about is validation of existing processes. So what are you doing and how can you claim that this steak is pretty bloody good and the consumer feels happy about eating it and paying the 20, 30, 50% premium against the shit that comes out of a barn for that privilege of eating it. New Zealand's in a really sweet spot at the moment. I look, I'm diverting a little bit from your comment, your story now, Blake, but what Trump has done, in my view, by putting the tariffs on imports into the US, particularly around the 12.5 sort of table stakes, he's conditioned the US consumers they're just going to have to pay more. And they have, because they love their hamburger patties and they love their beef and they don't have enough at home. So the price has just gone up and the US consumers have paid it. And that's had two effects. Firstly, it's washed over other proteins as well. So the whole market has lifted in price. And not only has it done that, it's washed across other markets. So China is paying more. The EU is paying more. The Middle East, before they had a small issue with a strait somewhere near there, was paying more. And so there's been a reset, because normally what happens when you see a price go up like that, and we're seeing it in wool at the moment actually, price went massively up and then it gets to a tipping point and it comes on a slide. And we're just seeing that in wool right now. But with meat, that was what I expected a year ago, and it ain't happened, which is great because it's reset the starting point. But having said all of that, the consumer issue underlying it all is still fundamental. So those Whole Foods customers might not be talking about sustainability day in, day out, but it does mean something to them and they do have choices and it will influence their purchasing decisions. So like it or not, if you're listening to the market, if I've got to pay the interest bill on your friendly loan, Blake, better listen to it.
Yeah, because one of the questions I did have, you mentioned, the actions taken by Trump in the US has suddenly had a big impact on the prices we're getting for the meat. So, when farmers are doing that long-term planning, do I stick with sheep or do I diversify? How do they decide which future signals are material and which of those are just kind of noise? We've had conference season, we're maybe in the middle of conference season. There's a whole range of different views around the future of farming. How do you, again, bring that down to your business and implement that into your long-term planning?
Yeah. Look, I start with the consumer or customer, actually, I'll start with the asset. So what's the best use of the asset class that we've got here? And what do I like doing? I guess it's when carbon price was $100 a tonne. It's easy to say carbon's a future plant the whole farm and trees, and there have been people that have done that. And carbon is now at $50, and we'll see where it ends up. It could well still be that for certain land classes, that is still the best use of the land. I think of my gorsey gullies here. Lawrence, when the gold miners came out here 150 years ago, they had gorse in their pockets, literally. And we grow trees really well, including gorse. So if I've got gorse and gullies, I planted in radiata. You could argue that it's another weed, yes, but at least it's worth something. So, there's the highest and best use for that land class. So start with the land class and then what can I do? And it might not be what you're doing now, and you can see land class, land use changes over time, not always for the better. If you look at Pukekari now, you could argue quite easily that the highest and best use of that land class from a capital point of view is to turn it into 400 square metre townhouse blocks. And yet we're losing the most productive soils in the country, which are going to feed us as a country. So, is that the highest and best use? Economically, yes, but from a whole systems view, no, it's not. And we've got to take that into account in our own places too. So tree in the right place would be my summary here for that. But, that doesn't mean to say that horticulture or some form of arable, probably not grain, but, I look at what Leafed is doing with their protein and, that's conceivably something that could fit into some farming systems or many farming systems in some locations into the future. So be open for that. But then looking forward, and I guess that's tied up with the leaf comment, is where are consumer demands and dynamics going? And that's just another reason to be closer to your processor, because they're the ones that bring the money back, and they need to be relevant into the market on an enduring basis. And if they're not providing you with those market signals, you need to either ask them why or change. So change your provider. Because they're integral. You're making big decisions on farm that will have long-term ramifications, not only about capital allocation, but, potentially utilisation of land. You need to be placing some firm bets. So, and we just need to look at the viticulture situation at the moment, or perhaps apples. Apples are great. The PVRs around the plant varietal rights with apples are fantastic, but Rocket are having some trouble at the moment because they've overextended in terms of the area that they planted. It'll come right eventually, and there's going to be some pain and haircuts to get to the point. But ultimately, does that mean, so does the Rocket experience mean that plant varietal rights, horticulture in certain parts of the country is not the right way to go? Absolutely not. Just look at gold kiwi fruit in the right locations. And I've got a vested interest with my Tenders and Growers global hat on, TNG hat. We've got 3 PVRs that we grow, which are just the duck's nuts when it comes to the apples, as far as I'm concerned. Rocket is in that category as well, but there is a supply-demand balance that needs to be met. And Zespri have played it really well with where they release their grower licenses in anticipation of a market pull-through. So don't go and saturate the grower platform and then worry about selling the product. Find out where you can sell the product, how much you're going to need to realistically do that, and then have your growing portfolio increasing in size as a consequence of that. So demand pull rather than product push. So land use change is real. It needs to compete. Listen to what's happening in the marketplace from your processors and make decisions accordingly. That's where I start. And, the value sets come around that. Do I feel comfortable doing that? Are we living within the planetary boundaries? Is it sustainable long term? What would happen if fertilizer couldn't get here for 2 years? Is your system sustainable? Just, think about it.
Yeah, which comes back to that, risk assessment that we talked about at the start of the conversation, and some of those what ifs and what would the implications of that be. Now, you've mentioned a few times, Rob, about the importance of the customer and markets. How should farmers think about changing market expectations around emissions, transparency, provenance, animal welfare, and proof of progress? How significant, in your mind, do you think that will influence how we're able to farm, or how we should be farming into the future?
Yeah. Look, I've already touched on it essentially, Blake, but it's critical. I guess really what it comes down to is what's your balance sheet capacity and what's your debt servicing like, because that's going to really set the heat under your feet as to how focused you need to be. So if you've got a lazy balance sheet and you've got no growth aspiration, you're just happy doing what you're doing and you've been here for a long time, that's cool. You can rock along, and if you can afford to buy a new ute every 3 years and go on an overseas holiday, and I might sell a bit of land or something like that. There's plenty of families that have done all of this over the years, and you could rock along. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying that the consequences aren't that high. But if if your debt position on the farm is big because you're in growth mode, or you're young and you've got plenty of you're putting sweat equity in for the next 40 years to pay that down, then you need to be really listening to the market. So my view on is this, and the context is protein. So a chook, if you think of a hen that goes into a teagle or a chicken processing factory, that brood fowl will grow about 200 eggs a year, I've been told. I haven't got many chooks myself that do that, but I've been told that a chook will have 200 eggs a year. Now, just imagine they all live. It takes 12 weeks from hatch to slaughter on that, and they've got very high feed conversion efficiency. So they take around about 1.3 kilo of grain per head, roughly, 1.3, 1.5, to put on a kilo of live weight. And you slaughter a chook in 12 weeks' time, and it's a 1.5, 1.8 kilo carcass. Let's call it 2 for easy maths. So you've got 200 breeding opportunities a year times 2 kilograms of meat. and bone, 2 kilograms of customer offer, 400 kilos of meat. Remember that number, 400 kilos. I'm a sheep farmer. Look at these things. Beautiful, aren't they? I love them. They all had a trip to China last year. These are last year's lambs. They've all expenses paid, one-way trip in a box. About April they went. My lambing percentage, we target 150% survival to sale on the farm, and we're jumping through all sorts of hoops to get there. Very focused on that, because you've got to balance the interplanetary boundary sustainability thing and maximising production, and that's not an easy balance. So we're doing it through genetics, we're doing it through feed, we're doing it through all sorts of programs to maximise that. And we drafted about 18, 19 kilos. So for easy maths again, let's say 20 kilos. I've got to keep a few of those hoggets back to replace the ewes that pop out each year. So let's say we've got 125% that we can sell each year. So 125% of 20 kilos is 25 kilos of meat per ewe, yeah? One breeding cycle every 12 months. So I've got a chook that does 200 breeding cycles and produces 400 kilograms of meat. I've got a ewe at 150% lambing, and I think you'll agree that that's, survival to sale, that's a pretty good target. There wouldn't be too many doing that, and, we don't achieve it more often than we do achieve it, but it's sort of in that general space. And we get one ewe producing 25 kilos of meat. 25 plays 400. So why am I banging on about this? Our meat needs to be expensive. I can't afford to sell it to everybody because I need to pay my back. I need to pay my operating costs. I need our product to be worth a lot of money, which limits the consumer set quite significantly. If you think about India, for instance, and I've heard it said recently with the FTA, it's the old bloody dog walloper. Imagine if they all ate a lamb chop or ate a kiwi fruit. Oh, Jesus, our problems are over. Well, the reality is, of that market, 1.4 billion people, you've probably got 1.2 billion of them have never heard of New Zealand and don't eat meat. Possibly. They certainly don't eat beef. So you've got a very small subset of consumers in a very big market that might have the ability and the appetite to purchase your products, but they've also got choice, because there are other companies that are lining up to go, well, shit, that market would be good for me too. How can I get in there and get my share? So we've got an expensive product. We need to be discerning about the consumers who want it, because there's not many who can afford to pay for it, which means when they have choice, we've got to really understand what their decision set is. And I just keep circling back. So my all of that, you wrap that up. If those discerning consumers are concerned about sustainability and animal welfare, you better listen, because I can't afford to go head to head with a chook that produces 400 kilos of meat a year. They will swap me every day. We've got to be completely different. And that means we listen hard.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that our margin for error for getting it wrong with those consumers is a lot less than competing proteins, or even maybe the same protein produced in other parts of the region that aren't they're more of a mass market kind of producer. They can possibly get away with a lot more than we can, because we need to be hitting what those consumers want so they can pay the prices we need to sustain the systems we're running.
Yep, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. We those low cost proteins, you just got a volume play going on. There's millions and millions of tons of poultry and pork produced and consumed around the globe every year. And make no mistake, there's going to be a bunch of consumers probably in India, but other markets like that can't even aspire to that. I think vegetable protein is going to be a real thing in the future. Brewed, fermented protein out of a vat is going to feed a lot of people. I've been saying for a while now, it's a throwaway line, but there's going to be a large chunk of consumers around the globe that are eating their protein consumption out of a pill that's scooped off the top of a ship pond somewhere. It serves its purpose to sort of expose it in a sensational way, but that's not a million miles away. A vat of protein that's fermenting away is a very cheap cost to serve once you've got scale, and that will impact on some of our farming systems, notably dairy, I think ultimately, but those consumers can't afford to buy these lamb chops, and we shouldn't be pretending that they can, because we're going to miss the game. Those chicken farmers or those fat producers of protein will kill us. So be discerning. The other throwaway line I've had for years, Blake, is, if you think about cars, we're selling a Maserati here. We're not selling a Ford Fiesta, and we're certainly not selling a bike. But that doesn't mean to say that those other two, just because we sell Maseratis, there's a big world out there, and there's a hell of a lot more Ford Fiesta consumers and a lot of bike riders. But we just have got to be really discerning about the type of customer that we're after.
I'm going to change tack slightly here. The role around climate adaptation and resilience on farm and how that plays into farm planning, water security, flood resilience, pasture preservation, infrastructure, feed flexibility. How does that come into your thinking with your own farm, Rob?
Yeah, it's pertinent at the moment given the El Nino warning that we just got. The interesting thing with the breeder finishing system is that you're in a system, so we're in a 12-month cycle, and the off ramps you have really are things like, can I sell more stores at certain times of the year, and then usually every other bugger's got problems with feed supply, and you you're in a real topsy-turvy market as a consequence of that. So how do you mitigate on farm? Part of our production system here for a number of years has been, what sort of summer forage crops can we put in to help mitigate that? And indeed, what sort of feed systems can we use to mitigate generally? So one of the things that we do here with a fodder beet rafno mix is our steer calves and for our calves. And the way it works, so years ago, it'll be 15 years, we did this experiment, weight gain over the winter, cattle on fodder beet versus kale. And we found, so the calves are doing 1.1 kilo live weight gain a day on it, and the kale was basically standing still, a little bit of a gain, but basically standing still. And the R2s were actually doing 1.4. It was even better. And you need the fodder beet rafno for a protein carbohydrate mix that works well. You got to balance it. The rafno has a added benefit in that we can put it in and feed lambs on it. These lambs had probably been on rafno at some stage, sort of like a rape over the summer, and you can deck it and then lock it up again and grow it for the cattle over the winter feeding thing. Yeah, so there's a sort of a double benefit there. Growth rates are good. So with the calves, and the reason we do this is my landform, we're rolling steep in some places, and certainly rolling, and 500 kilo live weight animals on the side of a hill eating swedes or kale over the winter. It's not really what I want. It's tough on the land, it's tough on the soil structure, tough on the animal. No one's having a good time out of this, and you've got to go put the bloody brakes up. So what we decided when we did those feed exercises with the fodder beet 15 years ago, we could see that a calf came out of the winter as an R2 about 50, maybe a little bit more, but about 50 to 60 kilo live weight ahead of their kale fed equivalent. So we finished the fodder beet, depends on the yield, sort of in September, and then they go straight onto the grass, and we put them into a techno finishing system. So what that is, it's not that flash, it sounds flash, but essentially what I've done is I've put a trough in the middle of a paddock, and because we're not uniform, we're not a flat checkerboard farm here, we've got troughs in all sorts of locations depending on where the water lines run. So we've essentially sliced up a number of paddocks like a pizza, if you like, and the trough is the centre of the pizza. So we've got a set of tape gates around the trough, and then there's these pizza wedges that come off, and they're about 1.8 of a hectare to 1 hectare. And the whole idea is we have small mobs of cattle moving every second day, and it's like they're always eating ice cream, and we get really good feed utilisation as a consequence too. The whole idea is we start killing yearlings or R2s in February. Now, we don't go to super heavyweights, but we go to what I consider to be a consumer appropriate steak. If I've got a bloody steak on the plate like this, well, I could eat it, maybe. but something that's a bit more consumer friendly is probably not a bad idea. So we had to go to 280, 300 kilo carcass weight, and that's fine. It hits all the EQ grading, and we get paid premiums for that. We get paid premiums for our Fat Plus accreditation. We get paid premiums for our Nature Positive. We can value stack. But the point is, on the farm, and this goes to the climate mitigation and soil risk minimisation, is that by having that feeding system in the winter, we are able to quit all of our finishing cattle by 18 months. If we've got 10 or 20 heifers hanging around out of our cull mob of 60 odd heifers, all of our steers are gone. And so we don't have to feed them over the second winter. They're expensive in terms of the feed that they need to consume just to stay warm. It's hard on the soil. It's a cost we don't need to do. And we've done it through an integrated feed system. So there's one example. Summer finishing crops. I would love the idea of water harvesting here. Under the current RMA and local authority requirements, it's really hard. I'm confident that is probably going to change. I think that's a big deal. Water is the unlock on so many farms. It just gives you optionality. So I think that's got to happen. But yeah, water harvesting is important. Different feed systems, offloading into a supply chain. So again, in my case, if the shit hits the fan and I've got to offload stores, it all goes into Silver Fern Farms, the land plan program. If we have to shift stores, or they shift them onto their other growers as well. So it's a closed loop system. I guess the key out of all of that, Blake, is seeing what's coming. Part of that might be consumer related, definitely climate related, and making decisions accordingly. So we do it.
Now, I'm going to have to wrap it up soon, but I do want to get your view on where you see science, data, agri-tech creating the biggest opportunities for farmers, and what can they be doing now to get ready for those opportunities?
Huge. Oh, shit. How much time we got? There is so much. So I'll give you 2 or 3 quick examples. So I've just bought a spray rig. And it's 40-metre boom. My biggest issue is on the hills, how do you stop the tips from hitting the ground? And the amount of money that I spent, which wasn't insignificant, I put the bloody money on it, and then I thought, maybe I should have bought one of those drones that can lift 100 kilos at a time, and maybe I should do my spraying out of that. I wasn't thinking fast enough, and I haven't got buyer's remorse, but I'm thinking, we've just reached an inflection point where that alternative technology is available and getting more cost effective. And the point is here now. I've got an EV side by side, and I was very happy about that when petrol hit $4 a litre. Happy days. Didn't worry about it at all. So there's another example. Something to get down into the tech. Something that we've been doing here for probably 4 or 5 years now. We run this Smart Shepherd collaring system. That is basically what it does is it allows me at scale, about 7,000 ewes. You can't go around and tag a birth. You just got no time, and there's too much happening. But how do we track individual performance? So I've got we're scanning today. I've just come out of the shed, and it's the happiest day of the year because, you can see all the potential. It's like, beaut. And then it's the saddest day of the year because, well, how much of that am I going to hang on to with the weather events and, all that sort of thing. So at an individual ewe level, we know what her scanning result is. She's got 2 lambs or 2 fetuses. That's all good. When it comes to weaning, I don't know what she does. I know she's in the mob somewhere, and I know if I bag her, she's reared 0, 1 or 2 lambs, but I don't know which number. Well, the 0 is pretty easy because you ain't got a bag, but the other 2 don't know how many, and I don't know to what weights. What this collaring thing allows me to do is it maps back to the EID tag, excuse me, and the collars are put on the ewes and the lambs, so we know which ear tag belongs to what collar, and then the collars talk to each other. We do this for about 24, 36 hours between tailing and weaning. And what we've got then is we run a regression analysis, or my geneticist does, and it says if we see an adult collar talking to a child collar repeatedly, there's a really high chance that that's a parent-child relationship, because they're close. And we've back solved for this, or my geneticist has, and she says it's as accurate as a DNA test. So what we've got now is we've got the ability to track through from scanning to weaning performance, and we can see how many fetuses actually converted to weaned lambs at what weight, what is the efficiency of that ewe, and what do we need to do to get her up to go again, body condition scoring and that sort of thing. We are measuring performance at an individual level now through scale. That has opened up over the last 5 years that we'll be running this, a 15% compounding average growth rate between my elite ewes and my commercial ewes. 15%. You just think about that. It all drops to the bottom line. Apart from the collaring cost, that's the deer is bloody poison, but it is worth doing because I know that the value uplift is significantly better. So and it's permanent because we are introducing better genetics into the program every year. It's like a snowball that just turbocharges. So I'm really excited by that. I mean, drone technology is going to open up so much opportunity around whether a precision application of fertilizer, weed control, just, there's two things, resolution, farm IQ, those on-farm systems, better soil, better management of your whole enterprise. So there's a whole bunch of stuff coming at us, Blake. I think that's really exciting. Bring it on.
I sense we could have another whole podcast on that topic with you, Rob. But I mean, it sounds like, huge upside, and you alluded to there, and just keeping the focus on the value of the tech ahead of the cost of applying it and how you can realise that value. We are going to have to wrap it up, but, finally, keen to get, last thought on if you had to leave listeners with one practical message around governance and future-proofing their farming business, what would it be?
Yeah. Yes, I do have one pearl, and I use this all the time, actually. It doesn't matter what your enterprise is, whether it's a big listed company or your on-farm business. Write this down, team. I have found it so important. The process of getting to the end result is as equally as important as the end result itself. Write it down. The process of getting to the end result is as equally as important as the end result itself. What does that mean? Engage people. Engagement. Communication. You can call it getting them to think it was their idea. Yeah, maybe. But it's about even unpopular decisions. It's about why, how, let's measure it, let's do it. If you've got that engagement, you've got so much better chance of it executing and executing well. When you don't have that engagement, you might get there, but chances are you probably won't. So I use that all the time, and particularly as chair, that's really important. I mean, as a chair, what I find my role increasingly, in fact always, is it's more of a traffic director role rather than being the smartest guy in the room. And I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Everybody's got a role to play, and the chair's role is getting the best out of everybody at whatever level that is. So the process of getting to the end result is equally as important as the end result itself. What I do see, and it's something for owners of businesses to work on, particularly if there's a succession plan, the next generation are coming through, is engagement, because you've been so used to calling the shots yourself and being accountable for those, of course, but increasingly you're getting stuff done through others. You've got to let go. And it's not a case of, just bugger it, I'm out of here. It's not that at all. It's about because the next person coming through, the son, the daughter, the son-in-law, the daughter-in-law, whatever, they're not completely formed yet, Do they know how to do a GST return? All that sort of stuff. So they need encouragement and development, but that's not to say that they're without ideas. And and their ideas might need a bit of work. But fundamentally, if you don't engage, you're missing out on the execution, and you might be missing out on a really good idea. So it comes back to that flexibility thing that I've talked about right at the start. So that would be my key observation with regard to farming enterprises, Blake, is be ready to engage. It's really important at that transition point because you've got young people coming through who want to make a difference, want to do things. And that's not to say that every idea is a good idea, or it might not be appropriate at this particular point in time. But it's not a case of just saying, no, fuck it, I'm out of here. Sorry. It's a case of working with it to keep that engagement, to move on to new things. So the process of getting to the end result is as equally as important as the end result itself.
Yeah, what a great note to lead it on. Yeah, a good strategy and plan is important, but ultimately it's going to be the execution of that plan and strategy that matters. And to execute well, you need buy-in and engagement and everyone on the bus wanting to go in that direction and give everything they've got to achieve it. Look, thanks, Rob. We've covered a lot of areas and topics today, but thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the insights that you've brought and that balance between the, coming out of the shed, doing the scanning this morning to, the array of boards that you chair and getting that balance right. So thank you very much and really enjoyed the conversation.
Good on you, Blake. Cheers. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to RaboTalk's Growing Our Future podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how Rabobank can support you to succeed into the future, please go to rabobank.co.nz.